Thank you for tuning in to Shared Hope International's Invading the Darkness, an anti-sex trafficking podcast. We want to acknowledge that the content we discuss can be emotionally challenging and may evoke strong reactions. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back to Invading the Darkness. In part one, we heard of the powerful beginning of Tiffany's story as she shared her painful experiences with a system that failed her. We left off with her fight for justice just beginning, but today we're going to hear how Tiffany finally was freed and how she's using her voice to help trafficking victims just like her get justice.
That's right. In this episode, we're bringing you the second half of Tiffany's keynote at Shared Hope's 2023 Just Conference, where she shares the rest of her story, the moment she found hope, the fight for her case to be recognized as one of victimization, and the justice she so desperately needed.
This episode is not just about what Tiffany went through, it's about how she became a voice for change. Let's dive into the second part of Tiffany's keynote and hear how her fight for justice unfolded.
It was Thanksgiving week. We wanted her released by Thanksgiving because if we couldn't get her out by Thanksgiving, that meant she would be in until the following Monday. That's 4 days. Why did it have to be Thanksgiving? So some magic fairies did some things, and we ended up getting her released about 4 o'clock on Thanksgiving Eve. Now, at that point, we had kind of given up. I had my hands in the middle of a turkey. Yeah, I literally was in the middle of getting a turkey ready for Thanksgiving, and I got the text that Tiffany was about to be released. Didn't expect it. At that point, we thought it was going to be Monday. So we were on a group text. All of us were on a group text, and suddenly the phone's going off. Ding, 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 ding. Somebody's got to go get Tiffany. We had arranged for her to be transported to a residential facility, but those transporters were not ready. They were also getting ready for Thanksgiving, and so there was going to be a big delay. Next thing we know, we're getting text messages that somebody has shown up in the parking lot of Pulaski State Prison to pick Tiffany up. And we did not know who that person was. Tiffany didn't know who it was. The prison didn't know who it was, but we were very concerned that whoever it was not supposed to be there. And it was certainly wasn't part of our plan to get her to a safe facility. And so somebody had to go get her. And I was the closest one. So the next time Tiffany saw me was when she walked out to the lobby of Pulaski State Prison, and I said, "Hey, Tiffany, remember me? I'm your ride." And so she said hi, and thank you. Next thing we know, the warden comes out and says, "There'll just be a little bit delay. We're still processing her sex offender registry paperwork." And I said, "Oh, no, ma'am, you are not. Hold it 1 second. Susan, they're putting her on the sex offender registry." So the warden talked to Susan.
And a lot of weight I had, right? I'm her lawyer. You can't do that. That's not what the judge ordered. And luckily for us, the warden did not process the registration paper because I don't know how much time and effort it would have taken to get her off that. But everybody in the courtroom knew it was a make or break for the deal. And so Amy was able to say, no, she doesn't belong on the registry.
I was like, "Tiffany, I know you want to go, but we are not leaving here until I know that you are not on the sex offender registry," because that would have been a nightmare to try to get her off. So the picture you see now is the first place Tiffany and I went after she got released from prison.
This room knows
is anybody from Texas?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. This is Bucky's.
Yes. So we had a little time to kill because I mentioned that the transporters needed some time to get there. So again, Tiffany didn't know me. I was like, "Tiffany, we got some time to kill." There's this place called Bucky's. And I want to know if you would like to go there, because it's quite a thing, and it's going to be a little bit overwhelming. There's going to be lots of choices to make when we go there about what you might want to drink, what you might want to eat, and you don't have to go. And if you do choose to go and you get overwhelmed by that, please let me know, because we'll leave. But I want a Slurpee, and I don't know what else to do. So let's go to Buc-ee's. So we went to Buc-ee's. Do you want to talk about that experience, what that was like for you?
Well, first off, it was kind of overwhelming, but not to the point to where I was like, oh no, let's go. It was really kind of just overwhelming, considering the fact that, I had been confined for so long in a small place that was ran by correction officers that, in my opinion, really didn't give a shit. But honestly, I also looked at it like I think I just really confused myself.
Oh, it's okay. It's an overwhelming
I'm
story.
sorry.
But you picked out the change of clothes, so.
Definitely. I remember the only thing that I really wanted to do, because I believe Amy had asked me, well, what do you want to get? What, are you hungry? Are you thirsty? What do you want? And I remember the only thing that I said was, I got to get out of these clothes. That was the only thing that I even thought about I wanted to do at that moment, was get out of these prison-issued clothes. They had to go. I felt so out of place.
So what do y'all think about the outfit we got her?
Can you read it? Yeah, strong as a mother.
It says strong as a mother. And we looked at every t-shirt and I'm like, I think I like this one for you. And she's like, yes, that's the one I want. And Tiffany changed clothes at Buc-ee's. And for those of you who don't know what Buc-ee's is, it's like a mall gas station, basically. It's huge.
It's bigger than this ballroom.
Yes.
And it has everything in the world for sale.
And in Georgia, people go there for fun. And there's a lot of people there. But she changed clothes. She came out of the bathroom. I was like, you want to throw those away? She said, yes. There was a garbage can right there. I said, go for it. It's right there. And she threw those prison clothes in the garbage. Yes.
And I still have the outfit, by the way.
Okay. That is, we're going to finish up with talking a little bit about what we've done in Georgia since. But before we move on from that, is there anything else that you want to say about your experience or where you're going? Anything at all? This is your moment, which you don't have to take either.
I think one of the biggest things that I just really wanted to say was, when it comes to trafficking victims that are being interrogated or investigated, I just feel like that the investigators and all of law enforcement, they need to really take the time and the commitment and the compassion to look at the entire case and be able to understand what the victim has been through, even if it's on a different level as far as being personal. Because we all know that if you haven't been through it, then you don't quite understand it 100%. And for me, it was the investigators, when they were interrogating me, they never asked the right questions. And in my mind, I felt like all of the signs were there. Completely. The age difference between me and him, it was 17 years apart. The fact that when I was getting interrogated was the first time that I have ever heard that he was a sex offender already. And the fact that I was only 17, anybody knows with the sex offender rules, you can't be around anybody under the age of 18. So that put me as a victim from the very beginning. But they never realized that, or even took the time to even consider it. Another thing I was able to, when I started working with Karina Rising, I started doing blogs for Andrea for events and stuff like that. But I also had the opportunity to meet another victim, which is now she's in the process of becoming a survivor. She was convicted in Texas for murder due to her trafficker, and it was her and her younger brother. I think I haven't really quite heard anything else about this case, but I know that they were convicted, and I was actually one of her mentors. So I was really grateful to have the opportunity as well.
So Tiffany was advocating from jail for other survivors. It was very magnanimous of her, very big-hearted to do that when she herself had also been penalized by the system. So I'm going to just run through some lessons that we've learned in Georgia. Tiffany just highlighted a large one. I've already mentioned it, the need to educate law enforcement and attorneys. These are both prosecutors and defense attorneys, to understand that you have to build rapport with survivors. You have to trust them. You have to expect them to not trust you initially. So you're going to have to work on building that. Most survivors, law enforcement and lawyers need to know, are distrustful of police and law enforcement and will be inclined to cover for the trafficker because that's what's been taught to them. Both the prosecution and the defense in this case erred. They saw the acts that Tiffany took of giving condoms to the other survivor in the case, the victim, and taking money on behalf of the traffickers. Those were the acts they saw as trafficking. When everyone in this room knows that's just how the trafficker runs his operation. He distances himself from the events by using another person he's already victimizing. There was also a text from Tiffany's phone telling her friend who wanted to run away that we will come pick you up. Tiffany, did you send that text?
I did not.
Her trafficker, again, very common for everyone in this room, had taken her phone and had texted the 13-year-old that they would come and pick her up. And without support from law enforcement or her own attorney, she didn't really feel like she had any options. And what was really the driving force behind why you decided to plead guilty to trafficking your friend?
I really felt like, due to everything that was going on as far as the case and the way that I was being interrogated and the way that the investigators were speaking to me as if I was actually a bad person or as if I was the monster in the case, it made me really feel like I just had no other choice but to go ahead and just plead guilty just to get it over with.
Well, and Tiffany, you ended up with the rock star of all legal counsel eventually, but there was a moment when you had other representation. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about that experience of having an attorney that didn't quite understand some of the things that we're advocating for in this slide?
Yes. My first attorney that represented me when I initially went to court, December 8th, 2011, which I wasn't due to go until December 11th, which was a Monday, but I ended up getting called in on that Friday for a plea bargain, which I did not even know about until I got there. And like I said, my son was only 3 months old. So I was initially, when I got the text and the call from my grandmother and them letting me know I was supposed to be at court, I was actually at the WIC office. And my son was at home, asleep, with my mom. So when I got there, my attorney let me know what was going on as far as the plea hearing, and he was like, everything's going to be okay. He dressed it up a little bit, pretty much making it seem like I had no other choice but to take the plea bargain, or I was going to do basically the rest of my life in prison. So I went ahead and I took the plea bargain. He said that I wasn't going to do that much, maybe 10 years. He said that I would be able to see my son during that time. When it all came down to it, neither one of those things happened. I ended up getting a sentence of 30 years, served 20. And considering the fact that my charges, I was a sex offender, I had to take classes while incarcerated, and I was not able to see my son the entire time.
It wasn't just the prosecutor and the law enforcement and the defense lawyer, though. It was also the judge. And we need to educate our judges. They have continuing judicial education requirements, and this can be done. But when Ms. Simpson, when Tiffany told the court that she was afraid of her trafficker, the judge responds with, well, that's why you shacked with him for a year or so, because you were afraid of him. And when he said that to you, Tiffany, during the course of a plea colloquy where he's supposed to be getting her version of events, How did that impact you in court that day?
Belittled, degraded. Again, it just added on to the feelings that I already had of me being a monster, and it made me feel like I was looking at this situation from a different point of view. Like, maybe I was the cause of it. Maybe I was the monster in the case, and not even my trafficker.
So Tiffany shut down. When you have the transcript, you see that she's just kind of yes, knowing to all the questions after that. She ceased trying to explain to an unreceptive, ununderstanding audience of this judge what had happened to her. Can you back up just for one sec? And one point that I would drive home as an advocate for her, and that actually did resonate with the DA, is that the men who purchased the 13-year-old were given 20 years to serve 5. And I did not understand, and the DA said he did not understand either, the disparate nature of those sentences. And so that was one thing that did move the needle a little bit in our negotiations with him, is that Tiffany was treated differently than the buyers.
This was the attitude of the entire criminal justice response in her original case. Yeah. They thought she was a predator, and they treated her like a predator. And that word was actually used when I went and met with the DA that day in Bainbridge. And so we were dealing with a real, like I said, we're smart in Georgia, but we were dealing with some real backwards ideas about human trafficking down there in South Georgia. Yeah. But here's how we're kind of hopefully moving on from it.
Moving on. So once you have a vacature law in your state, you can then say, well, if we're going to remove these convictions because we understand that they're committed as a direct result of being trafficked, then we should also have an affirmative defense. We already have that in Georgia if you're charged with prostitution while being trafficked, or if you're under 18, it's automatic, or you have to show coercion or deception if you're older. But affirmative defenses are used in every state. They're common. The judicial system is set up to handle them. Juries get instructed on them. Self-defense, stand your ground, mental incapacity, and in Georgia, involuntary intoxication all have affirmative defense laws. Duress, people say, should be used in domestic violence cases and in trafficking cases. But the problem under the law with duress is that it has to be an imminent threat. And traffickers don't operate on imminent threats. They operate on pervasive climates of fear and coercion. So it doesn't really line up with duress, although it's certainly a close cousin and not that far of a legal leap. I want to shout out Oklahoma and Wyoming, who have really strong affirmative defense laws that I was shoving in front of every Georgia legislature I could find, saying, look at these laws, not that far of a stretch. So this is something we can take away and continue to advocate for. It doesn't have to prevent, the negatives to affirmative defense are that it doesn't prevent the arrest or prosecution. You raise it during the trial. So you've still got that effect of a survivor going through a criminal justice process that they should not have to go through. And most states that do have an affirmative defense law require that direct relationship, which again isn't that hard to establish, I don't believe, in these cases. So I have moved from seeking affirmative defense to seeking immunity. This is my new gold standard, and this is part of like the learning process. If you can't get one, try the other, right? Keep advocating in your states for these different opportunities. So immunity says right from the beginning, you don't get prosecuted. And if we're going to have vacature, follow me now, where we remove a conviction, don't we want to save the trauma to the survivor and the time and resources to the state of going through this prosecution just to have it removed, right? So not a big intellectual leap. I've got 12 jurors who are agreeing with me. I'm good. So that's what I think is better about immunity. And we do have immunity defenses in Georgia, one of which if you're protecting yourself or others from harm, or someone who is seeking medical assistance. So if you're a doctor and you stop to help someone who needs help, you can't be charged with involuntary manslaughter. You have an affirmative defense of trying to help them. I think it would also lead to the increased identification of victims of trafficking earlier in the process, because their defense lawyers would also be looking for this. And survivor-centered laws like this just make it feel like the justice system is on their side and they can come forward and share what happened with them. And so I I think the whole room should leave saying immunity is what we want. When do we want it? And we want it for any crime, at any time, at any age.
Okay, so what are our next steps in Georgia? We're inspired by this work in Georgia, thanks to Tiffany's case and some others. Our Survivors First Act was revised to include incarcerated victims. It's a work in progress, right? We passed the Survivors First Act, we revised it. Tiffany was released, and then a few months later, we heard about another case that made us realize we still have work to do on our Survivors First Act, and we're going to be revising it again in this next legislative session, hopefully. This was a case of a 16-year-old who was arrested for aggravated assault, murder, possession of a firearm during a commission of a felony. I'm not going to use this victim's name. She is, it's public record, but she is not to the point where she really wants to be part of the public eye. But she was a victim with an extensive history of abuse, physical abuse from her father at 8 years old, systems involvement, classic case, extreme poverty, drug and alcohol abuse history with her mother, HIV exposure at 14. She met a buyer through a trafficker on seekingarrangements.com and agreed to meet in that buyer's home. She got there. She did not know that the buyer had a history and was on the sex offender registry. And when she got there, she realized that she was in danger because there were multiple firearms laying out in plain sight. She was scared. She shot and killed the buyer. So she was sentenced in February in Georgia. She was represented by a public defender who negotiated a plea deal. The DA was sympathetic to the case, and the plea deal under first offender status was reduced down to voluntary manslaughter, 20 years, 10 to serve. So I hear about this case and I'm like, well, let's just vacate it. That's what that's for, right? But unfortunately, to vacate a conviction, you have to be convicted. And under first offender status, it's not actually legally considered a conviction. So we are now in Georgia revising the law again to include first offenders survivors who are sentenced as first offenders or under conditional discharge statutes may not be convicted, and as that term is defined in Georgia law. So we will revise the Survivors First Act to include those survivors who are convicted under first offender status as well. We have another case in Georgia, the Felicia Blakely story. She actually is serving time in Georgia as well for killing some of her buyers. You were incarcerated with Felicia. Yes, you want to say anything about that?
I met her at the beginning of my sentence, and it wasn't too long before she got transferred, but we didn't really get too close, but, we spoke in passing. She was a really great hairstylist. Overall, she was a really outstanding person. She was always polite. Like, I didn't know her story. I never asked her about it until I got out. And actually, I recently just watched her movie. So that really put me into where I understood her story, and I was like, wow, if y'all met her, y'all would never think that she was a victim or that she went through any of that.
She has a reputation within the prison that she's incarcerated in as being a model prisoner and participates. And she's very well known for participating in a lot of really great events that they put on there. The movie is called When Love Kills, the Felicia Blakely story, for any of those of you who would like to watch it. But it's her story, it's Tiffany's story, it's our victim that I just spoke about that has really inspired us in Georgia to create our Incarcerated Victims Project that we're going to be working on in 2024. So we know because of Tiffany's story and others like Felicia that they're not the only ones. We know that our prisons in Georgia are probably full of human trafficking victims, and many of them may be there for reasons that have to do with their trafficking. Our Survivors First Act has been revised. We can use it for incarcerated victims. So we're really going to push forward on this in 2024. We have a three-phase project that we're going to implement in 2024. We're going to start by training attorneys. We want to go into our correctional facilities for women and survey our survivors to determine, thank you, oh my gosh, thank you.
You can do it too.
Yeah, so we want to know, right? We want to know if there are incarcerated survivors who have remedies under the Survivors First Act. So we came up with this great idea. We came up with a survey. It's still in draft form. We actually used our domestic violence commission, a project that they did, as a model. They were going into the prisons and surveying domestic violence victims who had killed their abusers. And so we used that as a model. We tweaked our survey, and then I was like, wait a minute. We might be overwhelmed by this. We have to have legal representation for the victims. So we backed up, we hit pause, backed up, and said, okay, phase one is going to be training. We're going to partner with our Defense Attorneys Council. We're going to partner with civil attorneys. We're going to train them in the specifics and dynamics of human trafficking so they can recognize it. And then at the end of that training, we're going to say, we're giving you CLEs. Those lawyers love their CLEs.
They're required.
Yes. We're in return for that, we want you to agree to represent at least one victim pro bono. So we're going to create a network of attorneys. Then we're going to go into the prisons. We're going to survey, and we're going to start essentially using that network for representation for those survivors. So we're really super excited about that. This is in the beginning phases, but this is the work that's been inspired by Tiffany and others like her in Georgia. So I hope you know that that is a big part of your story, ma'am.
So just really briefly, it's not just a state's law issue. There is no federal law on vacature. There have been proposed legislations that have never gotten out of committee, so we need to work on that. You can raise awareness in your communities about these issues, and really any state with vacature laws, be sure that they are using those so that there can be relief for survivors that are presently incarcerated. I have to just give a quick shout out for the need we need for this. There are 91% of people who responded to the National Survivor Network survey in 2016 said they had been arrested while being trafficked and had an arrest record for that. And then just back to the shout out is to my old office at the State Department, where in 2015, I was already writing articles and speaking to the National Association of Attorneys General about the need for the non-punishment principle of survivors. It is in our TVPA law, and we need to say, what are governments doing to ensure that victims are not being inappropriately punished? And punishment's not just custody, it's fines, it's deportation. So there's a whole range of things that can come into effect that should not be happening to survivors under the law we have that is not being implemented. And this is this year's Trafficking in Persons report. Has a page on this non-punishment principle, continuing to say that federal and state laws need to be in place to protect survivors. And if I'm telling, or the current Ambassador Dyer is telling foreign governments to have a non-punishment principle, it's much more effective if we start at home and clean up our act here before we go out and ask other countries to do differently. The Trafficking in Persons report is much like the Shared Hope International report cards, where we score countries or states to encourage them to do better. I love this idea, but we also need the advocates in this room to really carry the ball over the goalpost so that we can have these changes for trafficking survivors.
So this is the teeny, tiny little courtroom in Mitchell County where Tiffany learned that she was going to be released. It is a cinder block courtroom. In this half of this building is the jail. Half of it is this little teeny tiny courtroom. And here we are outside after Tiffany. We've learned that Tiffany's going to be released. These are some of the amazing women who worked so diligently to make sure that the justice that Tiffany deserved was received and the wrong that had been done was rectified. We like to say we want to cut the C off of this picture in Mitchell County.
But we also have to give a shout out to the shorter woman next to me. That's retired FBI agent Barbara Brown. I told her I would mention her today.
Yes.
We wished she could have been here, but she had a family commitment. And just as I worked Tiffany's case for free, Barbara came in and did the investigative side for free. So again, lawyers can't do their jobs without paralegals and investigators. So Barbara, I'm feeling.
Yes, Barbara.
So thank you. And all this for you, Tiffany. This was your dream team.
I'm so thankful and grateful.
Tiffany's story is proof that, while the system is broken, change is possible. Her journey from being criminalized to becoming a voice for justice is a powerful reminder that no one is beyond hope. But as Tiffany mentioned, there are other survivors just like her that were left behind in prison.
Tiffany's fight didn't just change her life. It can change the lives of countless others who are still suffering in silence. We can make a difference too. Together, we can advocate for the justice and help stop the unjust incarceration of trafficking victims.
If you feel moved by Tiffany's story and you want to help, it's simple. Contact your legislators and stand up for survivors. Text Shared Hope to 52886 or visit the link in the episode description to take action today.
Thank you for listening to Invading the Darkness and helping us elevate survivors' voices. Tiffany's message is clear. We need to keep fighting for those who have been silenced, for those who are still voiceless in the system.
Until next time, let's keep shining the light in the darkest places. Remember, text Shared Hope to 52886 to take action and make a difference.